Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Before we get started with today's webinar, we wanted to remind you that registration is required to complete your webinar attendance quiz. So, at the end of today's session, after you do that, you will be eligible for a digital badge. You only need to register one time for the entire series. So if you've already registered, there is no further action needed. However, if you have not registered, you can do so by using the link that is being shared in the chat and then following the directions that are on the slide. We'll be back at the bit, ready to begin. Oh, welcome, we're excited, my name. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first session in American English Live, Series 23. We are so excited that each of you are here with us today. My name is Dr. Darlene Wiggins-Dockery, and I will be with you today along with my colleague behind the scenes, Javid, who will be responding to your comments and questions during our webinar today. We wanted to let you know that today's session will be recorded and shared across various platforms. By attending and adding your comments to the chat or comment section during today's webinar, your name, country, and or your comment may be included in the video recording. By participating, you consent to your appearance in the recording and its use for the purposes of the work related to the U.S. Department of State and FHI 360. If you do not want to appear in the recording, please do not share any comments in the chat or the comments box during the webinar. Throughout Series 23, we will explore a variety of topics in classroom management in the English language classroom. We hope you'll be able to use the practical ideas that we'll share. So here's what you can expect today. The session is about 60 minutes long. The presenter will present the material, and I, as your host, will ask questions and make comments too. But we really want to hear from you, our audience, so that we can address your ideas and your experiences. So please do share your comments and your thoughts using the chat box and the comments feature. Now, for today's webinar, let's talk elicitation and grouping strategies to support student learner output. Oral production can be one of the most challenging aspects of language learning. English language learners must take social risk to use English in front of others, recall vocabulary and grammar to build context-appropriate messages, and physically form the words, the sounds to create the comprehensible output. So it's no wonder that our students are hesitant to speak in class. This session will explore classroom management and interaction strategies teachers can use to elicit meaningful oral language and to create student groups that promote active communication in a supportive environment. And we are pleased to introduce our presenter, Heather Benucci. Heather is a U.S. Department of State English language specialist, program alumna, who has supported teacher education and outreach programs in Japan, the Balkans region, Russia, and Brazil. She is a contributing editor for English Teaching Forum and has created materials, conducted workshops for the English Access Scholarship Program, and is a past American English Live webinar producer. So welcome home, Heather. She loves to explore the outdoors in her home state of Alaska and beyond with her family and her two goofy dogs. Welcome, Heather.
Well, thank you so much, Darlene, for that kind welcome. And hello, teachers. I am thrilled to be back with the AE Live family. And I really do think of us as a family of educators here. And I can't wait to learn with you all today. I always gain so much from the things that you share. So I look forward to seeing your comments throughout the session, just as I've enjoyed reviewing your participation in some of the interactions on the American English for Educators Facebook page this week. So let's get started. We are going to focus on promoting student oral language, student speech in the ELT classroom through this concept of elicitation. So we are going to begin today by exploring the definition and developing a shared understanding for this idea of what it means to elicit. It's a phrase we see a lot in lesson plans or in teachers' guides. Elicit from students, elicit ideas from students. But what exactly does that mean, and how can we do it effectively? And after we build that concept understanding, we're going to think about how elicitation relates to the audiences, the listeners that we set up in our classrooms, and how those audiences affect students' willingness to use their oral language. And then we're going to turn our attention in the final section to ourselves. How do we use elicitation and grouping strategies in the classroom? How do we know what we do? And when we have that information, what can we do with it to enhance our instruction? So let's begin. Ooh, I do need to tell you one thing we're not going to do together today. I unfortunately am not going to give you the one best way, the right way to elicit or group your students. There are many variables at play in the classroom, such as proficiency level, class size, um, cultural expectations about teacher roles and student roles. So your classroom might be different from a colleague who's participating here. So there's not one right way, but what we will do is together build a menu of options that are available for you to make thoughtful choices about what you would like to do with grouping and elicitation to achieve your teaching objectives. So starting off with elicitation, we're going to use our 5 question words here: what, how, who, when, and why, to explore the idea of elicitation. So first off, I will need your help with the what aspect. I'd like to hear your definitions or understandings for the term to elicit. What do you all think that that phrase means?
Okay, teachers. So the term elicit, what do you think it means in the ELT classroom? I'm looking forward to hearing your definitions as well. So let's see. Are some coming in quickly to elicit? We are hearing from some of you already, and one response says, getting students to answer questions. That's a nice, simple definition. We have another response from Andrea, who is saying it is to get students to try to find out what they want to say on a topic. Then we are hearing from other participants who are saying to get the answers, to learn if they understand, to inspire students to do something. Um, Olga says to try to find out what students want to say on the topic. So those are some of the responses we've had so far. Back to you, Heather.
Excellent definitions, everyone. I'm seeing some themes in your answer. So let's turn to my way of trying to come up with an understanding of a concept that I want to revisit. And I usually go to the dictionary. So for Merriam-Webster's definition, matches with what a lot of you all were saying: to call forth, to draw out something, usually an information or a response, as many of you said. Let's dig a bit deeper. A education-oriented definition in the Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary Thesaurus is to get a student to provide or remember a fact, response, something else, rather than telling them the answer. So I'm hearing a student focus and extracting information rather than just pushing information to them. Okay, and then let's look at a bit more technical Longman Dictionary of Language Teaching and Applied Linguistics definition, which is using a technique or procedure designed to get a person to actively produce speech or writing. So to sum it up, elicitation is providing some sort of stimulus, a prompt to pull out, call forth, draw out language output. So what are we drawing out from our students? On the left-hand side, we can see examples of written output. Everything from the building blocks of letters, numbers, and symbols, getting more complex through words, sentences, paragraphs, and extended writing. And then if we look on the right-hand side, we can see oral output, speech. So the building blocks there would be sounds to words to sentences, extended speech, and then interactive speech, that back and forth communication. And both of these language output types are getting at some deeper information. From the teaching perspective, we're thinking of all different types of knowledge, vocabulary, grammar, phonology, and we're also getting insight, that invisible piece, into prior knowledge and experiences, what students already know or can do, things that they might remember. Is the teaching sticking with them that we've been doing, as well as some deeper aspects of our students' selves, ideas, opinions, beliefs, feelings, that true essence of communication with another person. So we are focusing, out of all of those things that you can elicit, on more of a subset, a narrow part. We are going to talk about eliciting oral output, so speech, for meaningful communication. And when I say meaningful communication here, this means communication where we're focusing on the content of the message rather than its form. So what the student is attempting to communicate rather than their grammar or their exact perfect use of the language. So meaningful communication as message. And how are we going to do this elicitation? So we talked about this idea of a stimulus or a prompt, bringing out, calling forth that oral language output, speech. And on the left-hand side, we have a two sensory types of stimuli being the plural of stimulus. And the first is nonverbal, and this is body language. In our example here, I'm sensing some maybe confusion or frustration from this listener, so the speaker might need to provide clarification. Or in the classroom, I might use body language like this, like, give me just a little bit more. Oh, you're on the right track. These small signals that can elicit additional speech. Looking next at object or image-based stimuli, this can be anything from real things, realia, to images such as pictures or actual three-dimensional objects, artwork, picture flashcards, all different things that you might use to stimulate, to prompt, to elicit student speech. Then if we switch from sensory into language-based stimuli, we can use written stimuli. So text prompts, charts, graphic organizers are a great way to do that as well. And here's a small example where students have been doing some brainstorming, and then they use that written brainstorming to lead into a discussion. We can also have oral stimuli, usually instructions or questions. And our examples here include describe your family to a partner, use 3 adjectives, or what's your favorite sport, why? And usually these 4 types of stimuli are combined when we're eliciting. We don't usually only gesture. We might gesture with an oral question, or we might have written supports provided with some sort of visual. But let's take a little bit deeper look at questions. We're going to talk about 2 types today, and the first is called convergent questions, and you might have heard these called display questions. And as we can see here in the graphic, usually a question is posed to a group, and the idea is that their answers will all converge. They'll all meet on one single answer, maybe 2. There might be more than one, but usually a single answer. So what are some examples of a display question or a convergent question? If I ask a class and show a picture, a visual stimulus, what is this? The answer is probably going to be a cow, or maybe a bull if you're being more specific. Or if I'm checking instructions for a task, how many minutes do you have to discuss? 5. There's just one answer. So the qualities of convergent questions include that the teacher usually knows the answer in advance, and there's some shared understanding of the audience of what the answer is. I show you the picture of a cow, it's a cow. It might be limited to just one or two answers, maybe yes or no could also be options. And these types of questions can be quite helpful for concept checks, for instructions especially, but they don't always lead to extended oral output. It can still be meaningful output, but it might be quite short what students produce. But that's not a bad thing always. The other type of question is divergent questions, or you might have heard them called open-ended questions. And if we look at the graphic on the right-hand side, we see a question going to the audience, and then the answers going in all different directions and lots of different answers. So let's look at two examples here. What is your favorite animal? There could be lots of answers to that question. I bet if I asked this group, there would be 100 different answers. Why is it important to vote? Definitely more than one answer there. So these questions are different from convergent questions in that the teacher does not usually know the answer in advance. They might have some concept ideas in terms of why it's important to vote, for example, but they wouldn't know what everyone's favorite animal is. And more than one answer is possible and usually encouraged and expected. And these types of questions can promote more extended or elaborate, more detailed speech in the classroom. So, Darlene, will you help me in our next example as we look at convergent and divergent questions in the classroom?
Of course.
Super. So here we have a mural in my hometown of Anchorage, Alaska. I love this mural. I feel so happy every time I see it. But let's pretend that we are using this image as a visual stimulus along with some oral or written questions to get students ready for a reading about artwork in our communities. And I might have some different questions I'm going to ask. So let's look at some questions here, Darlene.
Okay.
I've got two groups. I have group A over on the left and group B on the right. So group A is, what season is it? Why do you think that? An audience, you can kind of be taking a look at the pictures and thinking about what you might answer. How does this mural make you feel? And then on group B, what is in the middle of the picture and how many birds do you see? So based on the definitions that we just established for convergent and divergent questions, which set, A or B, do you think are divergent?
Well, A would be divergent because you wouldn't know what responses the participants are going to give you, the students are going to give you. There could be several different answers. Critical and creative thinking will be needed to respond. So definitely A.
Exactly, exactly. So group A would be, as Darlene just very nicely explained for us, divergent questions. So what season is it? You know, you might say spring, you might say summer, and there could be different reasons, justifications, students using those critical thinking skills for those answers. Whereas if we look at group B, the second question, how many birds do you see? 6. There's 6, you know, that's one answer. So hopefully this example helps clarify this difference between divergent and convergent questioning. And thanks for your help, Darlene.
Of course.
Okay. So we have established what elicitation is and some ways that we can do it, some of the how. Let's take a closer look next at when. Oh, just kidding. Who's doing this eliciting? Well, it might surprise you first to think about students as eliciting. Let's look at an example here. So the student can elicit from the teacher, perhaps during a warm-up activity. Maybe a student asks this question, Mr. Ilyich, what did you do this weekend? That is valid elicitation. He is trying to prompt the teacher for a meaningful communication. We can also have student to student. So students asking each other questions, in this case, playing a game. Mina, would you rather sleep late or wake up early? Why? And then we can also have what many of us would usually think of as traditional elicitation of teacher to student. So the teacher asking, Carolina, please share one new thing that you learned today. And looking at these questions, to me, they all look like divergent questions. We don't know the answer in advance. There can be lots of different answers, and some of them can involve critical and creative thinking. And if we turn these examples to help us think about when in a class elicitation happens, I think you can see anytime. The first example is at the beginning, maybe during a warm up. The middle might be during some language practice. And then the final question on the right-hand side would be maybe some review and informal assessment at the end of class. So elicitation doesn't only have to be when you're introducing a topic at the beginning. It can be anytime that makes sense. It might be something that you plan in advance or something more extemporaneous or unplanned in response to what's going on in your classroom. But you don't want to elicit everything. You can be overused if you're asking the students trying to draw out every piece of information. There is room and expectation for some direct or teacher facilitated instruction as well. So don't think that you must elicit everything. Okie doke. So let's turn things back over to you, teachers. I would love to hear from you. Now that we have our understanding built for elicitation, what are some of the benefits of eliciting that meaningful, that content-focused oral output from students?
Okay, so what do you think? What are some benefits of eliciting meaningful oral output from students? Oh, well, now we have some responses that came in pretty quickly. They're coming in pretty quickly this time, Heather. Um, and the first comment or is from Isabella, who says, I think Divergent because the feelings vary per person. And I think that was Isabella's response when we were looking at that beautiful mural. She agreed with you that it was Divergent. So did Rasha. And then we received a comment about elicitation from Mr. Sakur. Please pardon me if I did not get your name pronounced properly. But his comment was actually, elicitation depends on your students or participants' prior knowledge. What are your thoughts, Heather?
Yeah, I think that it can be a great insight, a tool for teachers to see what students already know and can allow students to be confident in sharing their experiences. And I see some other comments have come in about promoting active participation and helping to get that underlying understanding of what students are learning, um, giving rise to natural output, um, informal assessment. So lots of things. Let me compare your ideas to some things that I had been thinking about. And thank you for sharing, everyone. So from the teacher perspective, you do have that window into informal assessment. Are teachers understanding what I'm trying to communicate? Are the students understanding what I'm trying to communicate? Are students retaining some information from past lessons? And also, you can use that for pacing. If students know already or seem very familiar with a concept, maybe you can move a little bit more quickly through a portion of your lesson, or maybe you need to slow down and do a bit of review. And you can also use it for future planning. Maybe you need to do a mini lesson on a certain point related to the content that you've covered in the lesson. And perhaps most importantly, as you all mentioned, the student-centered aspect of elicitation, promoting that student production, activating prior knowledge, helping them check their own understanding, letting them show what they know, demonstrating their knowledge and skills, and that can build confidence when they feel like a valued member of the classroom. and also gives that chance to share ideas and opinions. And that builds trust, class community, and that authentic need to communicate. And it can spark motivation. As we saw with that mural, elicitation can get students thinking, interested, excited for what comes next, and encourage that critical and creative thinking. So lots of benefits, but there are some challenges. So why not, perhaps? It can be more time consuming to pull out, to extract information from students or student to student, depending on who's doing the eliciting, versus just telling the students, right? And you have to do some planning and instruction giving. Not a bad thing, but definitely still a challenge. And it can be overused. If you try to elicit everything and you students feel like, what's this? What's this? You know, we all know it's a cow. Why are you asking me? It can feel a little bit irritating. And students will feel that lack of momentum in the instruction. And then something that scares teachers, silent students. When we're eliciting, it can be caused by many things. Perhaps the students don't quite understand the stimulus and we need to reformat or reform what we're trying to say to get them to speak or what we're using as our stimulus. And they might not know the answer. That happens. It's quite common. We don't expect our students to know everything that we're teaching. And that can be useful, as we said, for our own planning and instruction. Students might also be culturally unfamiliar. They might be expecting the teacher to be the knowledge giver, the one who is transmitting that information, and they're the recipients. So why is the teacher asking me? Does she or he not know the answer? So there might be some expectation and routine building that's needed to make elicitation culturally comfortable in the classroom. And then we have shy students and other affective factors. Affective factors being those emotions and feelings, maybe anxiety, shyness, nervousness, that can keep students from wanting to speak. And then the other side is the students that never want to stop speaking, which can be great in the English language classroom. But if you have that one student who always has their hand up, teacher, 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 it can also affect the classroom dynamics and how people interact and want to speak. So what do we do about these challenges? We're going to look at some possible solutions in this next section as we move on to interaction management through grouping, and how that affects the relationship with how the elicitation strategies that we're using. So, group dynamics. This is the idea of how individuals, when you put them together with others, how they interact based on perceived power relationships, those affective factors, shyness, anxiety, boldness. So when you put people in a group, what's going to happen? So in the classroom, we teachers, we create audiences for our students when they speak. So who is the listener or listeners when our students are speaking? It can be the whole class, small groups, partners during pair work, and sometimes it's direct student to teacher if the student's asking a quiet question perhaps to the teacher. So my question for you to think about is, how do these audience types affect our students' willingness to speak? Thinking about whole class, small group, and working in pairs in particular.
Okay, so let's hear from you. We know that who the student is talking to, what the group dynamic is, will impact our students' willingness to speak. So, how? How does that impact their willingness to speak? Let's see what your responses are. And while those responses are coming in, Heather, I wanted to share with you some of the comments that we received on benefits. Yogesh said it triggers discourse. Arena says oral practice, further metacognition is possible. Olga said they are productive practicing speaking. Camila said involvement. Then we heard from Morel, who said help students with their critical thinking. and that it promotes critical thinking skills. We also heard from someone who said students will have time and understanding. And then we heard from Jeanette, who said encourages students to practice and improve by expression.
Mm.
Merrill says it builds their confidence. And now the response to how can audience type affect students' willingness to speak. Arena said working in groups can lower the affective factor. Students are less stressed. In pair work, it also happens. Zini says for the whole class, they work all together. It encourages them to be active. Then we heard from Rasha, who said, yes, some students didn't know the answers. So my thought is, Rasha, are you saying that because some students don't know the answer, perhaps they're less willing to speak out? I think that's what Rasha's communicating with us. And then Catherine says, does affect to a good number of students, the kind of group. And finally, from Higher Grace, we heard small groups make it less intimidating from students. Oh, one more just popped in. Manuel says the audience is made up of higher proficiency level students who might be afraid um, of speaking in front of them. So if you have a mixed level class, perhaps the higher proficiency students may be intimidating to the other students. So those are some of the responses we've received. Back to you, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for sharing those thoughts. There are a lot of things to think about with group dynamics, yes? Um, from what I'm hearing from your answers, and I also noticed the American English for Educators Facebook page, the similar discussion about this, there were some themes about anxiety in front of peers, especially in that whole class setting. And a lot of teachers said that sometimes they like to start with pairs, then move to the whole class to help with that because of, as many of you said, it's less intimidating. The effective filter or the effective factors can be less extreme in smaller groups. So let's take a look at each of those first three things, starting first with whole class. And I call this teacher fronted elicitation because we think about it usually with the teacher physically in the front or maybe off to the side and calling on individuals as they're eliciting. So some of the benefits of this arrangement is it keeps students on their toes. And that's an idiom that means to be ready or expectant. They know that the teacher can call on them at any given time. So they might be more tuned in or paying more attention because they might be next. And a benefit that I often think is overlooked with this type of elicitation is self-assessment. So if I call on Darlene, for example, and I ask her a question, everyone else in the class who didn't get called on is probably quickly checking the answer themselves. Did I know that? Yes. Oh, I didn't know that. And maybe again, they tune in more to what Darlene is saying. It provides that quick self-check, even if you're not the one that's answering. Some of the challenges, as you all said, are the effective factors in that whole class. You've got maybe 30, maybe 100, depending on your class size, sets of eyes looking at you as you have to speak that scary task. And I know when I speak another language, I feel nervous. So I can relate to my students that tense feeling of, ooh, it's my turn. Um, and we've already discussed those cultural considerations that maybe in some cultures it's considered rude to or showing off to be the one that gives the answer or demonstrates that knowledge in front of everyone else. There can be that anxiety from peer pressure of getting things wrong in front of my classmates. Are people going to make fun of me if I say the wrong thing or if I don't know? Or just general shy personalities. Those can all lead to silence in this whole class setting. And also the dominant student, the teacher, pick me. And everyone's like, Heather, stop raising your hand. We know you know. Okay. And sometimes students don't have the language proficiency to answer that whole class question, or perhaps the content knowledge. And those are the challenging situations when teachers are faced with silence. So what can we do? One technique when we are cold calling, and that's when students don't know who you're going to call on next, it could be anyone, um, is giving students a pass that they can use. And this is not like a physical piece of paper or anything, it's just a conceptual pass. So if I call on a student, they can decide, maybe because they don't know, they're feeling shy, maybe really anxious, they can pass this time. And they might say, teacher, I want to pass. And they can pass to another student, or maybe the teacher decides who will get called on next. So what does this look like? Let's do an example. Again, Darlene, will you help me?
Of course.
Okay. So I'll be the teacher, and Darlene is going to play the two students, okay? So uh, Ahmed, where is your favorite place in our city?
I like to go to the park.
Oh, me too. I love the trees there. How about you, Yasmin? Where is your favorite place?
Mm,
Do you want to pass this time?
yes, I pass to Hamza.
And then I would take my roster of all the students and I would put a little check mark maybe next to Yasmin's name. And I know she used her pass for the class. So it can be a quick way to give students what we would call an out, an escape route from that pressure of the whole class. And there's no judgment involved. You just use your pass and move on. And it saves a little time for teachers as well. So that can be the pass. All right, what else can we do? Um, so cold calling is one technique. Another, asking for volunteers. Who wants to give me a, or who can define? And what we can do here is use our wait time. And it's one very difficult thing for teachers to have that silence in the class. So how long do you wait? Unfortunately, there is no magic answer. Sometimes it's 5 seconds. Sometimes I have no problem. I'm not embarrassed with my wait time. I can wait 20 and 30 seconds, and it feels like forever. And usually, some student will surrender and raise his or her hand and give an answer, and they will then know that, wow, the teacher's not going to let us get out of this. She's going to wait, or he's going to wait until we are willing to share and speak. So you might need to adjust as your students get used to this idea of wait time, but be patient. Usually somebody in the classroom will volunteer. And be selective. If you have that student that's always raising his or her hand, maybe call on them later, especially if they're a more proficient student, and give some of the simpler, shorter, maybe some of those convergent questions to the students who are more shy or less proficient. So don't always call on the first person who raises the hand. Maybe sometimes you need to pick and choose to manage those group dynamics. And then the other option I love for managing some of the challenges of whole class elicitation is randomizing. So take the control away. Maybe you are, as you can see in the pictures on the right, pulling names out of a hat or out of a jar in this case. Or if you have a really large class, a technique I like is to roll a couple of dice. All right, the student in row 2, seat 7, that's who's answering the question. Or maybe you have a spinner that you take from a board game and use a set of numbers or student names to randomly choose who's going to answer in a whole class setting. And this can be quite helpful because it takes away the responsibility from the students. They don't have to put themselves out there and maybe feel like a show off or worry about getting things wrong. And it takes some responsibility from the teacher in terms of, it wasn't me, I didn't call on you, I'm not picking on you, you know, it was the jar, Carlos, it was your turn. So those are some options for managing whole class elicitation. Let's look now at teacher facilitated elicitation in pairs. So working with a partner. The benefits here, or as many of you said, both here and in the Facebook discussion, is that it builds confidence because there's less pressure. Students might feel more willing to speak when it's just an audience of one. They have more time to think and more time to talk, that student talk time. The challenges, though, can be it takes time to set up pair work. So you have transition time as you move into an activity. You have to do some instruction checking. You might have mismatched pairs with lack of proficiency. And the teacher can't be everywhere all at once, especially in our larger classes, monitoring all the output. And that's not a bad thing. We don't need to monitor every word that's said, right? We're focused on meaningful, content filled oral communication. So, what are some things we can do in pairs? Many of you mentioned think, pair, share as a technique to get students ready to speak. And in this case, we're going to talk think, pair, share, and share again. And I saw it nicely called think, pair, remix on Facebook, which was the first time I had seen that, where students are going to have repeated opportunities to share with different partners. And this can be done through conversation lines where students are in two lines facing each other and one line is rotating as they make new partners. Sometimes I've seen it called onions or inside circle, outside circle, where there's two circles of students facing each other and rotating. Or you can do more free-form mingles like we see in the images here on the right. So you set up a mingle with a regular think, pair, share. Initially, the students think about their answer on their own. So in this case, in the reading, which character's action surprised you? Why? Then they work with their partner, talk about it, and share. And in this case, the students are going to stand up, find a new partner, face the new partner, and share again the answer to the same question. And then the teacher might say mingle or play a short bit of music, and everybody finds a new partner and you share again, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times, depending on how much practice your students need and the complexity of the question. But this can be a great confidence builder because they get that fluency practice and they get to express themselves on a familiar topic repeatedly. All right, so think, pair, share, and share again. When we look last at groups, again, teacher facilitated elicitation. The benefits are the same as with pairs, that confidence building, time to think and practice, and more student talk time. The challenges, though, are similar to pairs, except for this last one, which I call freeloading. Have you ever been in a group where there's one person that just kind of sits back and lets everybody else do everything? That can be really frustrating for group dynamics. And then you can have the reverse of dominators, the person that wants to be the boss of every detail of the group and doesn't let anyone else talk. That defeats our purpose, right, for oral communication. So what do we do to help manage this freeloader dominator problem? You can do it with roles, or you can do it with playing a game that involves turn taking. And this is from the game set available for free on americanenglish.state.gov called Activate Games for Learning American English. And it's called Have You Ever, Oh, When? And it involves player one rolls the dice, they move their game piece, and then another player will ask them a question based on where they land. Have you ever traveled by train? And then player one would answer, oh, yes, I have traveled by train. Someone in the group asks, oh, when? I traveled by train to Belgrade last Tuesday. Oh, okay. Then the next person has their turn. So there's shared responsibility in terms of having to ask each other questions and follow up and the excitement of achieving the goal of playing the game as a group. So it keeps those freeloaders from sitting back because you have to take your turn and participate. And it keeps those dominators from being the boss because, again, everyone has to take a turn. So it's a great equalizer in a group to get everybody talking in a fun and exciting way. So check these games out if you haven't before. Okay, so we've talked about what is elicitation? We've talked about how does that elicitation connect to different audiences for our students in the class. In our final bit of time together today, let's think about how we think about our own practice. So let's do some reflection. And I'd love to hear from you all again. What is one way that you become more aware of or reflect on your own teaching practice? What techniques do you use?
Okay, so while you are thinking about your own reflection practices, Heather, I wanted to share some comments with you that came in. Um, we heard from Dilyara, who says these are amazing ideas. ASA said, interesting point, cold calling. I use volunteers in many classes. Alexandra said, I ask for volunteers all the time. Then we had someone who said, thanks. I've used this board game millions of times. And then we heard from Isabella, who said, in my context, pairs work well. In a classroom with the whole class, shy students get used to letting the normally participating students answer. Then we heard from Rasha, who said, if you divide them into groups, you will hear them by asking each group to share. And now we're having some responses to how our teachers reflect. What is one way you reflect on or become more aware of your teaching practices? We heard from Yogesh, who says an exit ticket. We heard from Nida, who said post lesson journaling. Van Lee said class survey. Higher Grace said different ways to elicit in large classes. And then we heard from Valeral, who said dialogue or through free games. So those are some of the comments. Back to you.
Excellent. No, really helpful insights. Thank you for sharing. I have some similar ideas, the ones that we just heard. Let's look at some ways that we can do self-guided reflection. My personal favorite is this first one, which is taking notes right on that lesson plan after I teach a lesson, because everything is fresh in my mind and it doesn't have to be fancy. I can take 2 minutes and just scribble what worked well or put a big X over something I didn't like. So it can be there for me the next time I teach that lesson, or I can go back and go, oh, well, yeah, that really didn't work. I need to add 5 more minutes here. Someone mentioned journaling, so taking a sort of scheduled break to reflect and write about how your teaching is going, maybe topics you want to add to your professional development list. And you can also record yourself, maybe audio or video, let your students know that you're doing it just for yourself, not to grade them. And then you can go back and watch a particular segment and maybe see how, for example, you're using elicitation. Are you doing what you think you're doing? And I'd like to make the point here that it is important to schedule, make an appointment with yourself. I put a reminder on my calendar, maybe for a 15-minute block on Thursday afternoon. And I'm going to take my journal out and I'm going to write. And by making that appointment with myself on the calendar, it keeps me from going, oh, I'll get to that later. I'll get to that later, and then never doing it. Reflection is so important, but it's a very easy thing to sweep aside as we busy teachers are juggling all of the aspects we have with managing our classrooms and our lessons. So make an appointment with you. Okay, so you can also ask other people to help you. And we're going to talk about peer-supported data collection. And this is asking somebody else to watch your class. So here's how you can do this. You set up a meeting with your colleague and identify what you want to know. For example, I want to know how much I use proportion-wise convergent questions versus divergent questions. And I would like your help in watching this lesson. So maybe you have a worksheet for them to use that looks something like this. It explains the lesson stages, the warm up. There's a mini lesson about plants and animals. Then we do a reading, whole class review, and an exit ticket. What I would like you, the observer, to do, please, is to count the number of convergent questions and divergent questions at each stage. Maybe just make a little tick mark every time I elicit those in those ways, and any notes that you have about the questions that I use. And then perhaps you could also make anything that was particularly effective or helpful, if you could make note of that, and any questions you have for me. So you would use something like this, quite simple, to help your colleague collect the information that will be most helpful to you. And then you teach. So usually you're going to put the observer in the back, as you can see in the picture here. And then tell the students that the observer is there observing you, the teacher, not them, the students. There's nothing to be worried about. They're not getting graded by this person. And then go through your lesson. After you teach, you would meet again. They would share, the person who was observed would share their data collection, ask you some questions, and then you, the teacher, will reflect on what you've learned from this process and incorporate this information into your future planning about elicitation and grouping strategies, for example. And if you need some help with this process, this was a very quick overview. There's an entire resource available to you on the American English webpage called Shaping the Way We Teach from Observation to Action. So please visit that resource page that's being shared kindly by the moderator if you want to have some more guidance for peer-supported observation in your classes. Okay, so we've done this reflection ourselves. We've had some data collection. Now, what do we do? When you are planning for elicitation and group interactions, think about what you're trying to accomplish. Are you checking understanding, sparking interest, doing some informal assessment, trying to get those deeper critical and creative thinking skills going, building community by sharing opinions and ideas? So once you know what you're going to do, then you go back to your menu that we looked at of different types of stimuli. Do you want to use nonverbal, image-based, visuals, written, oral? And then if you're using questions, do you want to use convergent questions, divergent questions? This is the how part of how you want to elicit. So you can put this directly into your lesson plan notes. Plan some questions in advance, or use some elicitation stimuli that you want to bring in, and think about grouping. How are these stimuli going to affect group dynamics based on those audiences and the effective factors that come with whole class, small group, partner? So we can go from the shy teacher, I don't want to talk, to students actively producing that meaningful oral language. All right, some closing tips for us today. You can't elicit everything, but elicitation can be your friend. It can be a great way to achieve many of the benefits that we've covered in this webinar. And as a teacher, it's important that we are fostering that environment where mistakes are part of language learning, especially when speaking, that big scary feeling of putting yourself out there to communicate. So be sure to make that safe space for your students where we lift each other up as we put ourselves out there. And use the divergent questioning to get those deeper, more elaborate answers. But convergent questions aren't bad. They can be meaningful communication tools as well. Use that wait time. It's hard. Be silent, but be ready to adjust. If you need to reformat that question that you're using, or maybe do a mini lesson and be ready to move on. And think about that mix of options you had for grouping and interactions and some of the practical tools that we reviewed. And then incorporate this idea of elicitation and grouping into your reflection patterns. Become more aware of what you do in the classroom. Sometimes you only ever ask for volunteers and you don't realize it till you take that time to stop and think, oh, maybe I need to do some cold calling or some randomizing when I'm using the whole class setting. So do some planning in advance and think about in your lesson plans what types of questions you want to ask or what types of stimuli you want to use depending on what you're trying to achieve. Let's go ahead and move through the next slide and on to the final question for you all. We'll come back to that. We'll just skip that for time today. Our closing activity today is thinking about one thing today that spoke to you, that made you stop and go, huh, I could do that, or I could try this in my class, and write a one-sentence action plan to share in the chat. So for example, you might say, I'm going to plan two divergent open-ended questions that I'm going to use in my next class. Or I'm going to ask a colleague to observe my elicitation habits this month. What can you do to put what we've talked about today into action?
And that's what we hope. We hope that when you leave our webinar, you have something you can put into action today if you have class today, and definitely tomorrow if you have class tomorrow. And while those answers are coming in, Heather, Lucas wanted to make sure we said thank you to you. This is a confirmation that I've been on the right track as for making the students interact in groups, pairs, small groups, etc. And now we have some comments that are telling us how our participants plan to use this wonderful information you've shared with us. One student participant says, I'm going to try these approaches for randomizing who I call on so that I don't always cold call. Then we heard from Mohammed, who said, use divergent and randomized approaches. Mansour said, be more passionate and creative in my approaches. And then Zinni said, ask my students to observe me. So those are some of the responses that we have. We want to thank you all for engaging with us today. And back to you, Heather.
Well, I love all of those ideas. And I especially love that idea of using students as your observers. Great idea. And I saw a lot of other wonderful action plans coming in the chat as well. I have learned a lot from your sharing today in the chat and on Facebook. So thank you for the interaction here and there. And I appreciate what you all do out there in the classrooms around the world and your desire to be here, strengthening your practice and building connections with other teachers around the world. So thank you, teachers. Thank you, AE Live team, Darlene, and everyone behind the scenes for the amazing support. And I hope that I have a chance to learn with you all again soon. Thank you.
And thank you, Heather, for sharing all of these wonderful ideas and strategies that support elicitation and grouping for student learner output. And then we'd also like to thank you, our audience, for your engagement and participation today. Please continue to share your ideas through social media and in your viewing groups after this session ends. And now you have the opportunity to receive a digital badge from our team here at American English for Educators. Registered participants can complete the quiz on Canvas now. You must answer 2 out of 3 multiple choice questions correctly. Your eligibility to receive the digital badge is based on your first quiz submission score, so please work carefully and take your time so that we can make sure that you receive the badge after you complete the quiz. If you successfully pass the quiz on your first attempt, you will receive the badge immediately from Canvas. If you have not registered for Series 23, use the link that is being shared in the comments or chat box now to register. And remember, you only have to register for the series one time. Once you complete the registration process, you'll gain access to Canvas and you can complete your attendance quiz. Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you back for our next session, which will be on September 24th. Until then, bye-bye now.